So good morning, good afternoon. My name is Przybylinski. I'm Director of Research at CIMdata. We're a global consulting and market research company focused on PLM. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in this position for almost 2 years now. Prior to that, I spent 7 years at the Systems building in part a social community focused on competitive intelligence. So at CIMdata prior to that. And then in the R&D work I did in the previous 20 years, a lot of it was focused on software and technology development and deployment. And I was actually principal investigator on a couple Air Force projects that actually were developing early socially related collaboration tools. So as I said, CIMdata focuses on PLM. Most of our business comes from consulting. I'm responsible for the market research portion. We see our services as providing significant synergy, where we learn things from the research that we do, both market research, technological research now with the acquisition of the CPDA group. And then that stuff feeds into our education and consulting. The education, for those of you who know us well, we've done education in this market for almost our whole 30-year, near 30-year existence. And we've gotten some good traction with our PLM certificate class, basically teaching PLM and about PLM both to end users and increasingly to solution providers and their go-to-market networks. In preparing for this talk, a lot of times what I'll do when I'm looking for information or trying to figure out a way to start is I'll look at what happened in this day in history. And I actually learned some things by doing this in this case. For those of you from the U.S., you know that the word Edsel is not a very complimentary word, known as one of the biggest failures ever in the auto industry. But the thing that I did not know, even though I watched those cars drive around when I was a child, was that Edsel was not just a car. It more resembled Lexus or Infiniti or Acura that have their own dealer networks, multiple brands. You can see here the pictures of their different brands. They all have the distinctive grill, which actually probably confused everyone into thinking there was only one. But even though they started big, they sold very few cars and lost, in today's dollars, almost $2.5 billion and folded within 3 years. And the reason I thought this was relevant today is this really a cautionary tale for social computing? This was a op-ed debate in the New York Times. Will our grandchildren tweet? Hopefully we'll be able to give them more than 140 characters, I think, with what they've done with Twitter. That's already happening. But this is true of any advanced technology. When it first comes in, people say it's a fad, it's not going to be around. You can see here quotes on telephone. We've used many similar quotes, Bill Gates on 640 KB of RAM and other things like that. One of the interesting points that was made in this discussion was that because of the way that we work, and this conference is a perfect example because we're all sitting in our offices or our homes or wherever we are, and but we don't really have that communal campfire, and perhaps that's what this technology that we're using today can be. We need to have a place where we can work together and collaborate together. Many of these platforms, particularly the public ones, face significant network externalities. Google would love to have as many users as Facebook, but because they don't have people there, they can't get people there. So it's sort of a chicken and egg problem. And the biggest threat that was discussed by these people was proprietary systems with too much control. So what are we going to talk about here today? We're going to define social computing. We're going to talk about what PLM is to CIMdata and to the people that practice it. What does social computing mean for PLM, and then maybe where do we go going forward. So Wikipedia, as often happens, provides some useful information. We'll talk later about curation. One of the interesting things about Wikipedia is it provides a lot of good statistics on social computing phenomena, namely the fact that 1% of the people contribute all the content. But it's about social computing in its definition is really about computer mediation. That how are people using computers to do social tasks in new and innovative ways, right? So people always communicated on email. Now everyone's a writer. They have their blogs. They can text. They can do wikis, other types of technologies. Another question for this space is, do we include unified communication? As many of the people are looking at, including video and other forms of collaboration. But the key thing is it's stuff that we used to do talking face-to-face or using other means that are now mediated by computers. We go to the next slide. According to IDC, who Mike Fawcett will be speaking here later, IBM is leading the fragmented market. They see it as being about a $4.5 billion market by 2016, growing significantly 43% over the next 5 years. And IBM claimed that a lot of the Fortune 100 companies are using their technologies. The reason that there's a question mark on the top of the slide is that if you look at the list of companies that are included, they missed a big one, Microsoft. Microsoft bought Yammer recently to extend what they can do with SharePoint. The reason I had the question mark in the previous slide about market numbers is if you look at SharePoint, according to different sources, SharePoint alone is about $1 billion business. Now, will all of that fit into the way that this market study is defined? It's not clear, but surely a bunch of it does. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that could be included in this space. Sorry, someone was walking up to the stage when I was there. The big thing, and we'll talk about this later, is the convergence of enterprise and consumer. That people are used to using these tools, they like to use these tools, and they want something like that at work. If you look at some of these studies, some of the biggest companies, tech companies in the world, play in this space. This is a short list here. These are just the big ones from the list of about 40 companies that I compiled when preparing for this presentation. OpenText has been around for a long time in enterprise content management, for instance. Salesforce.com, very interesting company for a number of reasons, particularly the way they create ecosystems around their tools, where they open up the API and allow people to build things on top of things. So the stuff that they're doing with Chatter and other stuff that's built into the Salesforce.com application are really interesting from this point of view. But yes, there are a lot of big firms, but there are tons and tons of small firms. And these are just a handful of firms that claim to be playing in this space. Many of them are in niche spaces, such as marketing support or human capital management or talent management. But there are a lot of companies out there, and just as companies in all spaces do, can they reach critical mass before some of those big boys in the previous slide decide to pounce in and buy them? Looking across all these companies, many of them are on the cloud. There are a few open companies here, and they range widely in size, at least according to Hoover's or Dun & Bradstreet. Some of them claim to be up to 120 million, but different numbers count them very differently. But the key thing is, almost all of them, if you go to their websites, and I spent a fair amount of time going to their websites, almost all of them can claim some iconic logos that all of us would recognize. So if that's social, how does this connect with PLM? In the abstract for my talk, I talked about the fact briefly that PLM is inherently social. Many of the other speakers here will hit on that theme as well. I don't necessarily mean to steal their thunder, but PLM is inherently social unless you're an artisan or a craftsman, or you're building stuff. It's your idea. You build the whole thing yourself. There's not too many people like that. Many people think of Da Vinci when they think of this type of thing, but one interesting way to think about Da Vinci is he had lots of good ideas in his codex, many ideas that saw things, or he saw things that were done many centuries later. Maybe if he actually had collaborated, he could have realized some of these things. Interesting, in the middle of the slide, De Architectura, for those of you in Europe who lived with the remnants of the Roman Empire, it's this book of knowledge that was created by Vitruvius that allowed them to replicate many of their civil engineering innovations across the Roman Empire. So it's a guide to building projects. For instance, many of the arenas around the former Roman Empire look like the Colosseum because they used the same plans. They basically replicated them using this book of knowledge. They built them using trade guilds of either slaves or free men, and one of their key innovations to be able to do all this stuff, interesting enough, was an early concrete. But the key point here is product development was always social. It's just most people do it with what they have available. So if you talk to many of the PLM solution providers out there, they recognize that the most commonly used bill of material tool is Excel. So okay, whoops, had myself. Okay, we typically use this slide with a build to show the evolution of the market, but this is just to give you a sense of how PLM has evolved actually to become PLM, because the early start of this was in product data management or engineering data management or technical data management back in the 80s and 90s. And then that expanded out to the enterprise. They expanded to the shop floor with things like digital manufacturing. It expanded to cover other parts of the enterprise when they included things like sourcing and operations of the field service, a lot of cost and sustainability across the whole life cycle. People started worrying about, well, we have PLM and it's helping us build products. Are we building the right products? So they sort of put the fuzzy front end of innovation as part of PLM. And then simulation has evolved to cover the whole spectrum, whereas initially it might have been used mainly in the define slice of this chart. Increasingly it's being used across the whole life cycle. And we had a session that was very well attended at our Market Industry Forum earlier this year, where we talked about, do you do CAD first or do you do analysis first? And it's increasingly becoming clear that in many cases you really need to do analysis before you start doing your design. For those of you who may not know me, I'm an aficionado of 50s science fiction movies. The reason that I was able or wanted to insert one of my favorites called The Blob into this presentation is the tagline across the top that nothing can stop it. PLM, as you saw in the previous evolution slide, started as a technical tool to support engineers, usually in a work group, and as it has expanded to cover the extended enterprise. Just as this quivering gelatinous alien was looking for human flesh, PLM is looking for adjacent markets to capture and to bring into the PLM market. And this is true of most enterprise systems as well. ERP, you could track the evolution of that in the same way. So how does CIMdata define PLM? PLM to us is a strategic approach enabled by a set of technologies. Some of the providers in the market will want you to buy their PLM solution. To us, all of them are PLM enabling solutions, because obviously, as we've seen, you can do product development without any of these things. It's just a question of how well can you do it and how many people can you bring into the product development process. So in our definition, we refer to the collaboration or collaborative creation, use, management, and dissemination of information, and that phrase right there should resonate with people that live in the social computing world, because that's really what they're about, is collaborative creation, use, and dissemination. For us, these strategies are enabled by a broad set of IT technologies, including mechanical design automation, architecture, engineering, construction, electronic design automation, many other tools. But the key thing is that they go from concept to the end of life. Just as PLM has evolved, the major IT domains have evolved. If you put this chart up without the red line cutting across it about 7 or 8 years ago, this is where most of the enterprise world was living. You had PLM, which actually at that point in time was really not yet fully seen as an enterprise strategy, but you had customer relationship management systems, ERP systems, supply chain management systems, all of these things battling to support that collaboration and development of data and use across the lifecycle. But there are lots of companies that we track that play in this market. Some of them you may recognize as being PLM players, some of them as services players, some of them as electronic design players, but many, many large companies getting significant revenues from this market. On the next slide, you'll see some of the leaders in this space. Some of the more familiar names: Autodesk, Siemens, IBM, PTC, SAP, Oracle. Many of them get revenue from social as part of PLM. So on the next slide, let's talk about what social computing means for PLM, both for the business of PLM and the practice. So on the next slide, what does it mean to the PLM business? PLM has a mixed reputation in industry. People are getting a lot of benefits from it. On the other hand, it also gets defined using things like large, expensive, takes forever. And my slides just went back to the beginning. But the key thing, one of the reasons that it takes so long, slide 24 please, is that companies have to do a lot of work just to get started. They have to understand their business processes, document them, figure out how to get the computer to help them do them. They have to understand what data the systems that they buy can manage, as well as what data they themselves would like to manage, who gets access to this information, and many other types of things that need to be defined a priori. And very often, because the expectations can be set so high, it does not necessarily meet them. And there are a lot of services required. This bar chart on the bottom of slide 24 is just services provided in support of PLM strategies. So if we go to the next slide, slide 25, many of those players in this PLM market have recognized that they need to go social, that their tools need to recognize the changes in demographics, changes in the business environment. People want to have input into the way their products are developed, and these are people from across the spectrum of end users, people that might support products, etc. Changing user demographics is important. We were having a call a few weeks ago with an architecture, engineering, and construction company that has many old engineers and architects that are using their software, and they recognize that even in their market, the demographic has changed. Consumerization of IT is an important phenomenon where people get frustrated that their enterprise systems do not provide the same level of support or interactivity that the things that they use every day online, like Twitter, like Facebook, like Amazon do. How have the PLM leaders responded? If we could go to slide 25, please. How have PLM leaders responded? Many of them have built some of these capabilities into their systems. Sophie Fonte, one of my former colleagues from Dassault Systems, is a speaker here. She'll talk undoubtedly about 3D Swim, how they're using it, and how they're promoting it. Oracle has some social capabilities, both through new UI technologies that they got from their acquisition several years ago of VEA, as well as some of the more recent acquisitions they've made in the social spaces listed on slide 25. PTC and Siemens primarily leverage Microsoft technologies and their partnership with Microsoft to help support this. PTC Social Link and Team Center Community from Siemens PLM software are both built on top of SharePoint for Microsoft. And SAP has both types of solutions. They develop Streamwork organically, and they got some technology called JAM from SuccessFactors. So what does this mean on the next slide for the practice of PLM? I normally use this in talks on portfolio management, but I realized when I was putting this talk together that it did a good job of showing how structured things have to be so that you can support them using most PLM solutions, where you eventually get down to projects that you're working on, specific tasks, and specific workflows that are used to get those tasks done. But I was looking for my colleague Chris Williams from Vooch influenced the next slide. I was hoping that they had a graphic of some of the things we talked about in his office, but they did not. So on slide 28, if we were able to do animations, I had a nice animation here, but there's a great set of collaboration tools and collaborations ongoing using the phone, using email, using face-to-face meetings, virtual meetings like these, telepresence, all of that stuff to actually get work done that is not necessarily supported well by the current offerings in the PLM space. The other key thing is that a lot of these processes generate a lot of information, and the core information that you need is the fact that the decision was made, but for later purposes you might need to understand how that decision was made. And search, which is the go-to method for getting through all that information, is not necessarily the best way to do that. And then the question is, for me, was, are social computing offerings filling some of those gaps? So if we go to the next slide, we'll see later in this virtual event, we'll hear presentations from Chris Williams from Vooch and Ron Close from Nuage, both of whom are heading companies that are building socially oriented tools that deal with those demographics, that deal with the way that people want to work. The Nuage UI here looks more like Facebook, but they're using social computing as their product, that they're putting offerings in the marketplace, so they're trying to leverage what people are expecting from social tools and bringing that into the product development process. On the next slide, slide 30, I tried to list many of the functions, processes, use cases, many of the things that are listed as part of PLM and sometimes get PLM applications, but many of which have to be done socially, like quality management or ISO certification or collaborative document development, collaborating with partners, etc. There are a lot of things that need to be done, some of which are supported by the existing solutions and some of which are not. So the question, as I raised in the previous slide, is social computing and the applications and solutions provided by those companies filling some of the gaps? So what I did is I spent some time talking to some of the companies, reviewing some of their websites. So on the next slide, slide 31, if it looks like PLM, if it sounds like PLM, then it actually is PLM. So these quotes on these bullets here come from the websites of many of the companies whose logos I showed on the slide. This text box is actually a screen grab from a pull-down menu, so you can see overlaps with many of the same industries that people talk about for PLM. So if it looks like PLM and it sounds like PLM, then perhaps people are using it to support PLM strategies. On the next slide, this recent study from McKinsey shows social technologies claiming to provide many of the same types of benefits that you would often see in PLM case studies, like reducing time to find information or find experts, reducing time to market, reducing product development costs, supply chain costs. So clearly, based on this survey and the other information, there is the room for and the need for both types of solutions for people to get their work done. So where do we go from here? Go ahead to slide 34, please. Is it a crisis or is it an opportunity? Looking for the Chinese characters for this, but I didn't include them here. There are opportunities. Very often you can use social tools to figure out what to do. That people can come together, collaborate, it's very easy, very straightforward, so that you can get things done where it might be very hard to define a priori the right process. And we've seen that a lot. I saw that in my experience working on 3D Swim when I was at Dassault Systems, that it is very easy to do forms of collaboration using those tools without having a predefined process. The other key thing here, as I've seen in our industrial consulting, is you can document the processes all you want, but usually the way the stuff actually works are very different from what gets documented. The other thing that has to happen is, and I've talked about this in other social talks that I've given, that people want to leverage these technologies because they see the energy that people put in social technologies in their personal life. And the joke that I made is that people love to use Facebook and some of those other tools because they get to talk about their favorite subject themselves. And you need to figure out ways to leverage that desire for the benefit of the organization. And I think talent management and human capital management are some applications that do that, because people have a self-interest in keeping the description of their skills up to date, both to get work within their own company as well as to keep themselves on LinkedIn so they might be able to find their next position. So you have to figure out ways to leverage that. Communities of interest are a big way, where you let people self-congregate to discuss things that they care about, whether it's product development or other topics. As I said, social computing generates lots of data, but how much wisdom can you really get out of that? Vooch is an attempt to help you do that. I know Nuaj is looking at that. We've talked to some other search-based firms. They're looking at semantics as one way to create knowledge and eventually wisdom out of that big mass of data. So hopefully those technologies will come to fruition the more that we're using these tools. One of the other things that often is discussed is the notion of curation. That I was going to use the chart on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. But on the internet, no one knows the information you put in is a dog. It's not true. So you really need to have the notion of curation, which actually was part of the formation of Yahoo. Yes, they had search, but it was the curation of the early web that was really the value of Yahoo, having people actually review information, see that it was valuable. So that notion needs to be incorporated in all of this stuff, because you want to make sure you have the right people participating, that 1%, the heavy contributors, or maybe the intermittent ones, the 9%. The 10% of the people that are providing most of the information, you need to make sure that that information is accurate and valid. And the final notion here is persistence. If you're going to use social sources, some of which might be on the open internet, to help you make product-related decisions, you need to make sure that that information is available a year from now, 5 years from now, when people want to revisit those decisions. So it needs to be available in LinkedIn, and this is crucial if you're in a regulated industry, because they can come back anytime in the future and ask you about that. So in conclusion, who's going to be the winner here? Social, PLM, some combination. The key thing for companies that want to use social tools to support product development processes, they need to do their due diligence around those companies. Yes, the tools might be cool, but if you're going to build something, if you're going to take the energy to build communities and to help support product development, you need to make sure that that supplier is going to be around. So you look at things like, do they have cash? Do they have solid investors? If they were recently acquired, are the people that created the thing still on board? Are they still going to be moving that technology forward? Who are they partnered with? If solid companies see value in partnering with them, that can say that maybe there's something there that you should consider. And whatever people you choose, you need to make sure that they have a solid plan to get to market and provide support to people like you, so you can continue to leverage their tools to get the benefits that you adopted them for in the first place. So to go back to my blob metaphor, is PLM going to absorb social? Is social going to win and PLM going to have to adapt? It's not totally clear yet. We do have some initial PLM specific offerings. Clear that PLM is going to have to support more of these types of use cases. A number of these tools, for instance, are around software development, and no one really in the PLM space is applying what they're doing socially necessarily to the software side of the business, or excuse me, the software development side of the product development process, as you say. One of the interesting things I found when I was looking at this, I guess I missed the press release when it went by, is that Atos, formed from the combination of Atos Origin and Siemens SIS, actually bought a company so that they could leverage the tool in-house. If you go back and read the press release, they say that they want to get rid of email. They recognize that as a consulting company, their human capital and their knowledge is a key asset. And based on what they said, they want to use Blue Kiwi to be able to support that. And I look forward, I have a call into my contact at APROS. I look forward to learning more about what they're doing there. And then it's clear from looking at the market data that many large companies, if not necessarily betting, are investing in social. And it is the thing that they're doing now. Hopefully it will evolve so that social turns into a Alexis and not the next Edsel that gets replaced. I'll take any questions. I'm not exactly sure how the Q&A works, whether it comes through chat or whether it's mediated by Darius, but I look forward to any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you, Stan. That was a great presentation. Yes, please ask your questions through the chat. Any questions for Stan?
Questions? See a lot of avatars in the room? You can raise your hand. There is a button for that.
We have a question coming from Chris Williams, I think.
And Chris is composing one.
Yes.
The question is, don't I think that social needs to be separate from enterprise application as collaboration cuts across multiple applications? I think there's arguments both ways, Chris. The problem with separate, as we've seen in a lot of these other domains, is the integration points. You know from your work at Booch that being able to tie to this different stuff does take a fair amount of effort. Personally, I think it's going to go as it's gone before. I think that there will be separate tools, but as those separate tools reach critical mass or get a following, then either people are going to copy them or they're going to. So, you know, I agree that that's one of the reasons that email has been effective, is that you don't have to have it. Don't have to have the same tool to do email. But no, I think there's arguments both ways. I think, frankly, starting out separate makes a lot more sense because there's a lot more room for innovation. It's much easier for companies like Booch or some of these smaller companies to be able to innovate and bring forward ideas than it might be for the big companies to drag around their huge install base to make them use stuff. So I think I agree that separate is good because it helps prove out the technology, it proves out the use cases, shows how things are going to be done, and maybe it'll be acquired, maybe not, maybe it'll just be emulated. Other questions? We have Massachusetts dominating the conversation here, because I'm assuming Chris is down the road here, as he usually is. Yeah, you talked about the issue is structured applications versus unstructured nature of collaboration, and that was part of the point of my talk. And this was something that was actually influenced by my conversations with Chris Williams of Booch, the fact that there is a lot of unstructured stuff that goes on every day, and how do you provide the support to be able to enable people to collaborate without totally changing their work process, and be able to capture it. You know, that's essential, because as I said in one of the previous talks I gave on this space, is there's only so much room for new applications. There's only so much room for someone to add a new UI to their daily work. So it does need to be something that ties to their daily work so that they can use it more effectively. Chris is making the point about FDA wanting unstructured applications. I'm surprised. Well, I guess they do want design history. The FDA wants unstructured is implying in design history. And that was actually part of the point that I made, is that regulated industries are driving a lot of this because of the need to have that data around and to be able to understand the decision-making processes, which are not very well captured by existing PLM tools. That's exactly what Chris and his colleagues at Booch have been going after, is how does all that work get done that gets you to the decision, and how do you capture all that information along the way so you can leverage it later. Chris has a rebuttal. I guess. Yeah, he's arguing, as you can see it, the true design intent of the ad hoc, unstructured. I think, I agree with you. I think that that's, well, I don't know about the design intent. I mean, so then that would mean you would need to have unstructured supporting the requirements creation, which, is possible. I think, and that's always an argument that I have with people like you and others that understand CAD much better than I do, is that the phrase design intent gets thrown around. I would say that what you're talking about more is the engineering intent, is if you're supporting decision-making processes on getting to an endpoint or getting to a product, then I would agree that it's the engineering intent that's being captured. Design intent is a different problem, but something that could be supported by social, and actually has been supported by social in the front end of the life cycle by tools like Streamwork and from other people that are supporting that unstructured collaboration in idea generation, idea management to get to where you're deciding what to make. So, no, I agree that engineering intent is essential.
Anyone else with questions for Stan?
Any other questions? Social to work in the enterprise, the social graph must contain the business deliverables and data. Yes, I think for social to work in product development for the enterprise, yes. That was what I was trying to get to with those two slides in the middle, where the hierarchy was portraying what often happens in the PLM strategies and enabling solutions. And then you need something underneath it for all of that unstructured work to both happen as well as be captured. So, all right, Chris, you and I will have to chat again.
And thank you very much for this excellent presentation. Thank you, everyone.